Hey guys, Metal Jesus here. Now today we're going to take a look at my entire Sega Saturn collection. I have some North American games, I have a bunch of Japanese imports, and in this binder, oh yeah, I've got some Holy Grail games. Let's take a look. Alright guys, we're going to go pretty fast through this collection because while I don't have a ton of them, I only have a little over 70 games for the Sega Saturn, you'll see that the collection is pretty eclectic and varied. Starting off with a heavy hitter here, that of course is Shining Force 3. That's a game that is highly sought after on the Sega Saturn, and it's for good reason because it's excellent. Next to that you have Heir of Zendor, which is a strategy game. And then a very curious game here called Scud the Disposable Assassin. And one interesting thing about Scud the Assassin on the Sega Saturn is that you can play the game either with a controller or a light gun. That's a pretty cool feature of the game. Now, one of my favorite things about the Saturn is just how well it plays shoot 'em ups. The shoot 'em ups on the Sega Saturn they're pretty top notch. And you see some really cool ones here, including Galactic Attack. That is a game that used to be fairly cheap on the Sega Saturn, but unfortunately is not anymore. You also see the game Paradise. That's another game that's pretty awesome. As well as Kingdom Grand Prix. That's a game that I was able to get, again, thankfully a little bit cheaper than it goes for today. But so many of these games are sought after for good reason because they're still a ton of fun to play even today. Here are some shooting games that I kind of grouped together here, starting with Solar Eclipse. That's a full motion video shooter, kind of like an on-rail shooter. Next to that you have Starfighter, which is also called Starfighter 3000 in other territories. That is a full 3D futuristic shooter, kind of similar to maybe Star Fox. You have the helicopter shooting game called Black Fire. I love that title. That's exclusive to the Sega Saturn. Next to that, you have Wing Arms, which is an aerial combat game. And then next to that, you have Siberia. That's an interesting one because it actually has multiple styles of gameplay. I threw it in here because occasionally in that game, you do play in first-person mode, but you also play in third-person as well. Now you might be wondering what's going on here. Well, on the left and the right, you have the Japanese releases of Police Knots as well as Snatcher. And then in the middle there is a fan translation of Police Knots that was made for me by a local Seattle collector. You'll notice that it says the Metal Jesus Second Coming edition there. This is a complete one-off that he made for me just so that I would be able to play the game on my Saturn, which I greatly appreciated. That's very cool. And it's probably no surprise that there are a bunch of fighting games released on the Sega Saturn, especially if you look into the Japanese market. So you see I do have one North American release there of a fighting game, Night Warriors, Darkstalkers Revenge. But then I also have, over the last couple of years, just gotten some random Japanese fighting games. And, definitely some sought after titles there. Often they're not super expensive, but they are a lot of fun. I don't play a ton of fighting games, but when I do, the Saturn is one of the systems that I do enjoy playing fighting games on. Some of the most popular titles released on the Sega Saturn, of course, are the Panzer Dragoon series. There are 3 of them on there, and the Panzer Dragoon 1 and 2 are on-rail shooters. We did get the North American releases for that. You see that in the middle there. Then I have the 2 Japanese ones. And then over on the right, you see that I do have the Japanese version of Panzer Dragoon Saga. That's the RPG. Now, the North American version is extremely sought after. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit here. But the Japanese version you can get often much, much cheaper, primarily because it's not as sought after. And so that's the reason why I got that in my collection. I didn't pay very much for it, and I thought it was a really cool cover. Here are some more random Saturn games, starting off with Nights into Dreams. That is another classic that was released on the system and much loved for very good reason. You also have Magical Hoppers there, which that's the Japanese version, but it was brought over to North America as Pandemonium. Same game, just a different title. And then you have the game Sky Target, which, as you see right here, is very much inspired by Afterburner. It's an on-rail shooter, and for the most part, I think it's okay. You know, those 3D graphics aren't really holding up very well, but the game is still kind of fun. If it is a gaming system that I'm collecting for, well, you know I'm going to have some racing games on it, and the Sega Saturn is no exception. And it's funny because while I do enjoy some of these titles here, for the most part, actually, when I go back and play the Saturn, I don't typically go back and play the racing and driving games on it because the 3D engine wasn't that great, wasn't that optimized to run a lot of these titles. At least that's my opinion, especially going back now and trying to play them. You know, they're okay, but they don't really hold up as well as some other systems. And so it's cool to have these in my collection, but do I go back and play them very often? I gotta be honest, I really don't. However, here are some games that I do play on my Sega Saturn, including the Dungeons & Dragons collection. That is a 2 CD pack of 2 of the Dungeons & Dragons arcade games, highly sought after, primarily because we were supposed to get a PlayStation 1 version of this. It never came out, and so this is only released in Japan, which of course makes it very sought after, very collectible. As well as Necronomicon, which is a pinball game, but what makes it really special to my eyes is that it features the original music by a Mr. John Petrucci, who is the guitarist for Dream Theater. So if you are a Dream Theater fan and fanatic like I am, I had to own this game because that's the only place you can get that music. It's pretty awesome. And then here are some Sega Saturn light gun games. Now, what's interesting is I'm starting to see the price of light gun games go up, and I'm not entirely sure why. It could be that there are some really unusual ones released on the Sega Saturn. You see the one up in the corner there, which I guess is based on an anime. I'm not familiar with it, but it was one that I wanted to get and play through, even if it's cheesy and bad, because I do love light gun games. So, yeah, it's cool to have these in the collection too. And then here we have an example of North American releases and their Japanese counterparts, and how the Japanese versions can be somewhat cheaper and somewhat easier to find. Now, on the left, you have Robotica. That's the North American version that was released in Japan as Daedalus. And then here you have the 2 versions of Virtual On Cyber Troopers. Of course, on the right is the North American release. On the left is the Japanese. Again, the reason why I have these, because I actually started with the North American ones, but then at gaming expos, I would run into the Japanese versions for pretty cheap, and I'd be like, sure, I mean, why not, right? The Sega Saturn had a handful of first-person shooters, and I have 3 of them here, starting with the original Doom. We've also got Duke Nukem 3D, and we have the much sought-after and pretty awesome version of Alien Trilogy. Now, I know that the Alien Trilogy also came out on the PlayStation 1, but I haven't played that version, so I can't compare the two. I would be really curious to play these 2 versions side by side and figure out which one did it better. I'm not entirely sure. Part of me thinks that maybe the PlayStation 1 version would be a little bit better, but I have nothing to go on, nothing to base that on. So if you know, let me know down in the comments. More random games here, including a virtual open tennis. I actually used to have a bunch more sports titles on the Saturn, but I never played them, and so I actually took them to Pink Gorilla and traded them in just because I just wasn't playing them. And, you know, these things are pretty big and they take up a lot of space, but I do occasionally like tennis games, and so I kept that one. Also next to that is a Stahl. A Stahl is an excellent 2D platforming game on the Saturn. It's exclusive to it. It's beautiful. I really like that game a lot. And then I have some weird import titles here. At least they're kind of weird to me because essentially years ago, I'm talking, gosh, it might be 5, 7, 8 years ago. It's been a while, but I went into a local retro gaming store called Another Castle, and the owner was there. And in the Sega Saturn section, he had this stack of Saturn imports. And he was like, you know, they're not moving. No one seems to be interested. This is way before Saturn got really hot. And he's like, do you just want them all? You know, and I think he charged me, I forget what it is now. I want to say it's $60 or something like that. And it was way more than just this. It was like a stack of, it must have been 15, 20, maybe 30 games or something like that. It was a lot. And I was like, sure, you know. And so I've had these in my collection for all of those years. They're very text heavy from what I've checked out. Some of them are probably not the type of game I would play. I know some of these have actually gotten fan translations, so at a certain point I might go back, especially in Secure Wars. I know you can play that one in English now, so that would be pretty interesting to do. But again, just random games that I've had in my collection simply because I just got them for like a really good deal. And then we get to the binder. Now these are all loose games, something I normally don't collect, but the games in here are the quality of games that you collect even when you don't have the cases and manuals. And you'll see why I say that. Starting at the upper left there, you have Albert Odyssey. To the right of that, you have Dragonforce. Below there, you have Saturn Bomberman. And then to the right of that, you have Magic Knight Ray Earth. Now, I guess Albert Odyssey was originally designed to be released on the Super Nintendo, but then got ported over to the Saturn. Now, what really stands out to me about this game right off the bat is just the absolute beautiful pixel art in this game. Just stunning to look at, and it's a really cool turn-based RPG. Dragonforce is a real-time strategy game that was brought over here and translated by Working Designs, and I have to say they did an excellent job on this game. There is some laugh-out-loud dialogue here, so funny and just so well done. Here's Saturn Bomberman, and many people consider this to be their favorite in the entire series of Bomberman games. One of the big reasons for that is because you can have up to 10 players playing the game at once if you happen to have 2 multi-taps. That's pretty epic. Now, these are the North American discs, and they're very sought after, so even though I don't have the cases and manuals, I'm very happy to have these in the game collection. And then you flip the page, and over on the right there, you have one of the most sought after RPGs ever made on any system. That, of course, is Panzer Dragoon Saga, the English version. That's all 4 discs right there. And so one of my long-term collecting goals is to get cases and manuals for some of these games in this binder. I should be able to do that when we get back to going to retro gaming expos, because that's the type of place you might run into these. And I'm hoping that at least because I have the original discs, that it will be somewhat easier and cheaper to get the cases and manuals. We'll have to see how that goes, but it'll be fun to do. By the way, these loose copies of Saturn games were originally sent by a fan to Anna, a friend of mine who's been on this channel several years ago. I think he sent them probably last year or maybe the year before. But anyways, they were in her collection. Then she moved to Canada, and so they got sent to Kinsey, and they were in Kinsey's collection for a while, but now she is moving to Japan, and so now they are in my collection. So I am the caretaker of these games, very happy to do it, but I also consider that, you know, if they ever wanted to dig in here and take them back or borrow them or whatever, you know, that would be completely fine, obviously. So guys, that's a quick and dirty look at my Sega Saturn collection. Like I mentioned, it's kind of all over the place, but it's a really fun system to collect for because there's just a random assortment of games on here, and some of them are pretty awesome. And I love collecting the import games because they got so many more games over in Japan. So yeah, it's an absolute joy to collect for. It's one of those systems that I do look out for when I'm going to retro gaming stores and conventions because, like I said, it's just so much fun to collect for. And often the Japanese versions can be cheaper than the North American versions. But I'd love to know if you guys collect Sega Saturn games and if there are some games you think that I am missing. Please let me know down in the comments below. As always, guys, I want to thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.